Afternoon, everyone. Sorry we're a few minutes running late. We've got Senator Steele. He'll be up here in a minute, and I know Senator Halpern, I think, is a few minutes late, so we'll have a couple senators arriving late, but want to go ahead and get things rolling today. Thank you for coming to the first Education and Youth Subcommittee on Students with Disabilities. We'll be going over kind of the subcommittee. There's 4 topics that we're going to kind of be diving into to see if there's, policy change that's needed, if there's legislation, or if it's an appropriations issue. Kind of one of the first topics is going to be, special education, like teaching models. The main topic would be inclusive classrooms. And I've been educating myself on that probably over the past 9 months. And even one of our senators that has a son with special needs, they had him in a fully inclusive classroom for several years, and saw great strides, and especially in social skills among other academics. So very interested to learn more about this model. Chelsea will be speaking to us here in a bit, and invited me to a meeting at Gwinnett County, and some of that leadership, and talking about what a true inclusive classroom looks like, which I've never seen. But you're supposed to be able to walk in the room and not tell the students with special needs or the regular ed students apart. You'd have a special ed teacher in the room and a general ed teacher, but they're co-teaching. The students are all together in a completely inclusive type environment. A lot of from what I'm learning, a lot of school systems, they work towards that model, but it's difficult to get there because of, even if you've got the staff and everything, it's the culture, within the school system, and it may be the way the teachers teach. There's training that needs to be done for that true inclusiveness, and a lot of times you may have an inclusive classroom, but you've got the general ed students on one side of the room and your special needs students on the other being taught separately. So looking forward to diving into that issue. Also, another point that we're going to be looking at is addressing, the teacher shortage, which is across the board, but dealing with teachers that teach special ed. There's a big loss there. I think there's a gap of about 500,000 teachers nationally, so going to be looking at that issue as well. And then also, when students age out, they age out at the age of 22. And then they cannot no longer go to their high school, and sometimes there's years of waiting lines where they're looking to get, the funding, which a lot of families need to be able to go to the programs for their kids that have aged out. I want to look at that issue. I know that's more of an appropriations issue, but I've also got to know a company in a family, and the founder of it was a special ed teacher that was retired. But it's Brightside Cafe, and it's a coffee shop, and they only employ students with special needs. But their vision is to get out in the community and educate other businesses where they may have room for one special need person within their business or two, and trying to push that narrative, which I'm excited to see that. And then the last thing would be students with IEPs, and allowing them to use their devices, when they take milestone tests or things like that. But, with that, I guess we'll move forward. Our first speaker today would be Olivia Davis, and she's going to give us an overview, of all those subject matters. And then we've got Chelsea Hutchins after that, who will be talking about inclusive classrooms.
Senator, do you have a preference if I present at the podium or in front of y'all?
No, doesn't matter to me.
I will head over here then. Thanks, Zach. Hey y'all, my name is Olivia Davis. I am a legal and policy analyst with the Office of Policy and Legislative Analysis, otherwise known as OPLA, or Senate Research, for those of you who have been here for a while and seen the office go through some changes. I cover policy areas encompassing education and youth, children and families, and higher education. So very excited to be here presenting on such an important topic, and as Senator Dixon brought up, kind of try to give a little bit of a broad overview of the legal and policy landscape, as well as delving a little bit into some of the topics that this subcommittee subcommittee is going to be looking at, and even potentially start talking about some recommendations to address the root causes of some of those issues that we've been seeing. On a personal note, my mom was actually a special education teacher for over 20 years and spent about a decade of that in Georgia. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to me and something that I have grown up hearing about. So very excited to hear that the Senate is looking into this area to provide some comprehensive policy to address some of the shortcomings that we're seeing. So I kind of want to start out looking at a little bit of the data trends that we've seen throughout the years. So we're going to look at both students and teachers before we get into the meat of this. So kind of before COVID and after COVID, you see this big shift as you saw kind of throughout the education sphere. So during 2019 to 2020, we're looking at about 7 million students receiving special education services. And then if you can see on this photo on the right, that number dropped just a little bit during COVID. Now, whether that's because those students weren't in the classroom as much and weren't receiving those services, or other factors contributing to that, you did see a bit of a dip, and that number has slowly been increasing since we came out of the pandemic. 21 to 22 school year, we're looking at about 14.7% of students nationwide that are receiving special education services in the classroom. And then in 2023, 1 in 6 students in the U.S., or 1 in 6 children in the U.S., 3 to 17 living with a disability. So a large percentage of both our child population as well as our students within the classroom that are directly benefiting from these services that are provided. Now, looking at the teachers, so as Senator Dixon touched on, we have been seeing a pretty significant turnover rate, specifically for special education and more broadly, of course, for our teachers across the board. It's about 20% of special education teachers that are turning over each year. 48 states, as well as DC, are reporting shortages, and you can see this graph over on the right here is showing the percentage of specific positions that are reporting vacancies for schools that have shortages. So of the schools that are reporting shortages with teachers, 71% of those shortages are specific to special education. It's one of the highest shortages that you're seeing within the entire field. In 2021, we were looking at about 500,000 open positions nationwide. And by 2031, the demand for special education teachers is expected to grow by 4%, which is a pretty significant number, especially considering that we are already grappling with significant vacancies within this field. So now with a bit of a landscape of what the data is showing, these are kind of the overview of topics that I'm going to walk us through. So we're going to start with a bit of history and terminology on special education. It can be a pretty technical field, so want to make sure that we have a solid foundation of the terms that may be coming up frequently throughout these meetings. We'll look at some of the special education teaching models, particularly focused on that inclusive learning style, talk a little bit about the special education teacher shortage, and then finish up with special needs aging out services, device usage for accommodations in the classroom, and talk about some overall findings. So there are some terms I'm going to briefly define for all of us. We've got the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Individualized Education Program, and then differentiating that slightly from a Section 504 plan, which are the accommodations that students are receiving in the classroom. And then the 2 legal standards under IDEA, which is free appropriate public education as well as least restrictive environments. So IDEA was first passed in 1975. It is the leading federal standard of what school districts are required to provide as far as the special education services that they're granting within the public school system. And the general basis of it is to ensure that students with a disability are provided the same access to education as their counterparts within general education. And the most important thing under this are these 13 diagnoses over on the right-hand side. So those are the 13 diagnosed disabilities that students must have in order to fall under the jurisdiction of IDEA, as well as receive IEP services and be entitled to the right that federal law affords. So as we'll talk about in a second, there are some other options for students who don't fall within one of these diagnoses, but these are the specific ones that we're talking about when we're talking about things like IEP services. And you can see most of them are pretty broad, so things like hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities. I mean, those can cover pretty broad topics to encompass several different students. Talking a little bit about IDEA funding. So it did come with a commitment from the federal government for 40% of the average per student cost within the public schools. Unfortunately, and probably a bit unsurprisingly, that has fallen short almost every single year since enactment. So the 2020 to 21 school year, you're looking at a little over $20 billion short in full funding. Now, the repercussions of this are that local districts and school boards are having to pull from their general education budgets to meet the shortfall of budgetary implications in order to meet those federal standards. So moving to those IEPs, so that's the program specifically tailored to meet the individual needs of the students with disabilities. So you'll put a team together comprised of the school districts, parent, guardian, students sometimes, and they're looking at specific factors that are going to be necessary for that child to succeed within the classroom. If they don't meet that benchmark measure, then that plan can be amended moving forward. And again, to emphasize, these plans are for students with a diagnosed disability, one of those 13 under IDEA. Distinguishing that slightly from a Section 504 plan. So Section 504 is going to be for all of those other diagnoses and disabilities that are outside of those 13 described specifically within the IDEA. So a Section 504 plan is going to be for students with a disability who need accommodations as far as access to education, but don't necessarily qualify nor necessarily need that specific tailored instruction within the classroom from an IEP. Then, of course, one of the standards under the federal law is a free appropriate public education, meaning no cost to parents, a specifically tailored IEP within public school, guaranteeing the right for those students to receive the same education services as their general education peers. And the basis of this is that all qualified persons with a disability under supervision of the school are required to receive FAPE, no matter the severity of the disability. Moving into what the classroom-specific dynamics look like. So this is looking at our least restrictive environment. And right about now, we're looking at 60% of students that are spending about 80% of their school day within a general education classroom. And so LRE requires that students be educated in a general education classroom as often as possible. So they should not be removed from a general education classroom and should be educated alongside their peers as appropriate and as often as possible. And you can see this kind of sliding scale here of you're always going to be starting trying to place the child in a general education classroom, and then if there need to be edits to the IEP plan, then you can look at alternative placements that go up in the restrictions. Determining what LRE looks like for each student. So you're always going to evaluate, identify those students' needs, identify their goals, support services, and to really emphasize, you're always trying to start in the least restrictive form and then increasing as necessary. So things that they'll be asking are, can the student be successful with related services in a setting, with accommodations, with the goal of placing that child in the general education classroom as often as possible. Moving into what that actually looks like in practice. So what does that look like within the classroom specifically to ensure we have a least restrictive environment? There are two kind of schools of thought as far as how schools are able to implement this. And the first is inclusive learning, which I'm excited for us to be able to hear a little bit more about after this. So this is referring to having students with disabilities alongside their general education peers throughout the entire school day. So you'll have these students within an inclusive classroom providing services to the students with IEPs and special need accommodations as needed. And you're focusing on three main components here, so the academic, physical, and social inclusion within the classroom. And the really interesting thing is that studies show that inclusive education can positively impact all students, not just the students who are receiving those special education services. So you're looking at improved academic success, developing a sense of community, support and access. But unfortunately, as Senator Dixon touched on at the beginning, there are some barriers that can hinder the implementation slightly. So things like lack of professional development, insufficient facilities, difficulty in creating relationships, and of course, funding, parent participation, and absence of policies that are aligned towards this practice, because it can be a bit difficult in practice. One really great example that I'll just shout out really quickly is the RISE program. This is through the University of Alabama. I know we're deep in Bulldog territory here, but it is a really, really great early education practice that has been around since the 1970s that's educating students of general education as well as students with disabilities in the same classrooms. And they're collecting real-time data, they're educating future teachers, providing several different therapies alongside education. So if you're interested in seeing what this might look like in practice, great example. So as opposed to inclusive education, there's also a practice of mainstream. And this is where we're looking at about 90% of our students with disabilities are being educated in this type of classroom. So this is integrating students with disabilities into general education classrooms as often as possible. So instead of having both pools of students within the same classroom throughout the entire day, this is integrating those special education students into the general education classroom when the circumstances allow so. So you'll often see students coming in for certain classes. So for example, if there's a student with dyslexia who struggles with English, they may receive special education services independently in a special education classroom and then return back to their peers into a general education classroom for math, science, PE, art. There was a 2001 study that outlined some specific recommendations, and I'll highlight the first one, which is avoiding overgeneralized labels, which we kind of talked about at the outset of this meeting, of ensuring that when students are being educated within a classroom together, and that when you have students with special education services kind of in and out as necessary, that you're still ensuring that the students understand the requirements of that, as well as understand that it is not because a child is less than, and that, you know, inclusive education is something that is important for all of them to be working towards within the classroom. So moving a little bit to the special education teacher shortage. And this is an issue that affects the entire education field and is something that is going to be integral to any policy recommendations that are put forward by the study committee. About 90% of the annual teacher vacancies are due to teachers leaving the profession entirely. And that's often due to things like low salaries, difficult working conditions, inadequate support, things that, you know, we've been hearing for a really, really long time. But the most significant thing is that teachers without full preparation leave at least 2 to 3 times more than teachers who receive what is considered adequate preparation for the role. And this is particularly important in special education because it is such a specialized field that teachers are coming into that necessitates full preparation before entering into it. Looking at what some states have been seeing and what some of the trends indicate, states with the smallest shortages have things like more preparation programs. They're graduating more special education teachers from teaching programs. Things like alternative route programs that are providing alternative education opportunities for individuals to enter the classroom have proven some success. And then, of course, the average teacher salaries in the lowest special education teacher shortage states is nearly about $7,000 greater than the salaries in states experiencing the highest shortages. Loan forgiveness and tuition reimbursement programs have also proven some success. All models to look to and potential solutions to address some of the issues that are experiencing. And speaking to that a little bit more, so a 2022 study proposed 4 strategies for specific consideration, and that's particular to the state boards of education of how they can look at the most effective policies to address both the teacher shortage, but specifically within the field of special education, and that is improved data collection, improved working conditions, partnerships with teacher preparation programs, and a differentiated pay scale. And that is very much in line with a lot of the reasons that we're hearing from teachers of why they're exiting this field. Georgia's also doing some great things to address this. So I'll shout out 2 programs in particular, which is the Georgia Teacher Academy for Preparation and Pedagogy. And so this is providing an alternate pathway. So some of those alternate pathway programs that see some success in other states. It's a 1 to 3 year performance-based program that allows individuals with a bachelor's degree to obtain a certification in teaching when they don't have prior education, training, and experience. One thing to note, though, is that an analysis of this program did find that about half of the teachers that were placed in special education positions did end up transitioning to general education roles after 2 years. And that goes back again to that specific preparation for such a specialty-heavy role within special education. Another really promising program is the Georgia Teacher Provider Retention Project. So this is focused on mentoring and providing support services for new special education teachers that are coming into the classroom and want that support and mentorship from teachers who have been in that role previously. Some really great data points from this. The 21 to 22 school year, you saw 84% of those teachers being retained for the next school year, and 89% of those teachers said it was specifically this program that was the biggest factor in keeping them within that role. There are some great national efforts as well. So Mississippi, New York, California, and Texas have been studied on more of a micro level. And the data shows that salary increases, mentorship, new teacher support, targeted financial incentives, as well as teacher residency programs were the most impactful areas of improvement that all 4 of these states focused on to improve their special education teacher shortages. Moving now to some of our particular programs that the subcommittee is going to be looking at. So the aging out services for students who are coming out of their K through 12 education, what those next steps look like for independent living or continued education. So in Georgia, students can receive special education services until the age of 22. However, at that point, all school-based support ceases. So this is a really important area to educate families and schools on, that those transition services and meetings happen well before the age of 18 through 22. Those meetings and those discussions need to be happening as early as 16 and often earlier, and cover things like guardianships, benefits, transition planning for education, as well as financial planning as well. DBHDD has some great programs. This is entirely independent from the IEP services and the education that they're receiving in a K through 12 setting. The report is about 2.2 million adults in Georgia living with a disability at this time. That's about 29% of the population. So again, a significant portion of Georgians who have access to these programs. And there are a variety of services that individuals can apply for, and the department will do an initial screening, let families know what the eligibility status is, and that encompasses everything from healthcare, educational, employment services, community integration, as well as some assistive technology. Another new emerging program is inclusive post-secondary education programs. So in Georgia, we have the consortium, the Georgia Inclusive Post-Secondary Education Consortium, which is an overarching group of higher education institutions that are promoting equal education opportunities for students with disabilities who are coming out of those K through 12 institutions. So this is a list of the colleges in Georgia that are currently offering these programs. This is a great opportunity for some students. It's not a right fit for all of them, but it is a great program that has seen a lot of emerging popularity in recent years. And then finishing out, just to talk briefly on device usage with IEPs and for accommodations. The most well-known type is going to be your assistive technology. So this is anything that's going to help a student with an IEP that requires accommodations within the classroom to be able to learn at the same rate and have access to the same education as their peers. This could be high-tech or low-tech devices, so anything such as speech translators or closed captions. It can even encompass things like more inclusive furniture, so standing desks for some students, or furniture structure that is less stimulating for some students that may be overwhelmed with classroom stimuli. And then, of course, some things like virtual reality, handheld computers, and then these are some of the more technical technologies that are being used in the classroom. Unfortunately, there are some challenges to implementation on this front as well. And the biggest things are staff training, so ensuring teachers are educated on how to use this technology, lesson planning, and integrating that technology into a standardized lesson plan. And then, of course, technical difficulties, so ensuring that schools have access to internet, that software is updated, ensuring that students have access to that technology outside of the classroom too. And research does show that how well special education teachers are able to integrate that technology depends specifically on how involved they are in the decision-making process for using such technology. So a lot of the technology funds are from a local or district level, so having special education teachers involved in those conversations of what is going to be most beneficial and useful within their specific classrooms is really important when you're talking about how funding is going to be allocated to purchase that technology. Some of the root causes of these disparities, so as we discussed, unequal resource allocation for devices and internet, things like lack of student digital literacy training and limited teacher training, making sure that special education teachers are involved in that decision-making process, unsustainable special education job roles, so going back again to that preparation and the workload that special education teachers are having to take on, and then lack of inclusive homeschool communication. But there are some recommendations that have proven to be helpful to addressing this technology gap. So things like encouraging schools to consider how they distribute resources, giving special educators time and space for training and to network among themselves, supporting students' digital literacy, investing in homeschool communication, a lot of great ways to address the root cause of the issues. So to sum it up, I kind of want to lay out 5 overall findings that this data has kind of at least pointed me to, and what I hope will direct the subcommittee as they look into sustainable options to address some of these issues that we're seeing. So to start, models do exist for more inclusive learning, and that is still living up to the least restrictive environment standard. However, the special education teacher shortage continues to strain districts, limiting their ability to really engage with these innovative learning practices. And similarly, while this is a national issue, Georgia and other states have seen progress when implementing services that are addressing the root causes. So things like improper preparation, lack of mentorship, disparities within funding and technology usage. There are some great special needs aging out services that exist through DBHDD, but those do remain independent from education and IEP services. And one really great program is this inclusive post-secondary education shift, which is really proving to be beneficial for a lot of students aging out of K through 12 schools. And then, of course, as we just discussed, various factors can influence schools and teachers' inability to utilize technology within the classroom, which is a specific point that I think will prove very successful in allowing students under special education services to have equal access to education, of just being able to access some of that technology that can be really, really impactful. Does anyone have any questions?
Turn my own mic on. On the students with IEPs dealing with, allowing them to have the devices they typically use, like for milestone tests, things like that. Do you know the reason or the logic behind not allowing them to use that, or is that just because it is like a standardized test and, like you said, some of the changes you'd have to make to allow them to accommodate them there?
Yeah, I don't have the specifics in front of me, but if I had to venture to guess, it would be just a lack of digital literacy on behalf of the teachers. So, you have a student who's using technology for something like standardized testing, and teachers not having the proper training on that technology or being unfamiliar with how to integrate that technology into the standardized curriculum or the standardized technology. And also access to it too, because, if students don't even have access to that technology within the classroom, then it's a moot point to be able to help for things like standardized testing.
Right. Yeah, I've just, visiting schools and things like that, talking to teachers, talking to students, parents, where they do have access to that technology and they're allowed to use it, in and tests in the classroom, but then you go to a milestones test. I know I keep going back to that, and they're not allowed to bring it. Of course, they're going to score. Typically,
Right.
I would imagine they would score lower, and then also you got the anxiety and the additional time it's going to take them to finish the test. At the technology part, and I'm just bringing this up, but
No, absolutely.
wonder if there's like an opt-out, because if it's not a, a test that's going to go towards their grade for them moving up to the next grade level, if it's something that someone with an IEP is going to have, get stressed out about, and they're going to have a lower score than they typically do, and then you're dealing with more issues than just the test.
Right, yeah.
Just curious about that, something I definitely want to look into.
Yeah, and ensuring that those accommodations are laid out specifically in the IEP plan is really important too.
Go ahead. Great.
I'm so
Go ahead,
sorry.
Senator Sims.
Thank you.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
apologize for my tardiness, but question number one, because I have several, okay? What are the state's numbers of our special, we don't always call them special need because it's needs, because it's based on, I guess it's categorized, based on whatever their disabilities are. Okay. So what are our numbers in the state of Georgia right now that may have an IEP or placed in the least restrictive environment to get help? That's the first question.
Okay, I don't have access to that data specifically for Georgia,
Okay.
but I can tell you that nationally, you're looking at about 14% of the student population that's receiving IEP services and disability services within the school systems.
Okay. The next question is,
Actually, we have that number.
Oh,
I have the breakdown for the LRE for Georgia right now.
okay, where are you guys from?
Maybe we can hear it. Maybe we can.
Yeah, I'll let y'all.
I was gonna say-
I'll let y'all present that when you come up. Thank you, though. Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I'll go
You,
to the next
you can make that
question.
part of your presentation.
All right, how does the LREs, how do they impact the classroom teacher? You're placing students that supposedly or have been tested and have some kind of disability, learning disability. How does this impact the quality output of the teacher? Because the teacher has to monitor closely that student or those students, because we know that it could be more than one in that classroom. How does this impact the remaining class that's enrolled in that class? How does it impact that, the output, the total output?
the students or
Yes,
the teacher?
The teacher and the students, because what we're hearing now, teachers are so overwhelmed with, and we know that in public education, you educate everybody. You cannot make a difference. But these teachers are expected to transform that student, help that student or those students within that classroom space, along with those that aren't. Do they have parapros? Do they have some kind of assistance in that classroom? What's going on?
So often, yes, there are a plethora of support services that are in place for students who are in that least restrictive environment, particularly for those inclusive classrooms where, as you said, you have students with varying needs that are placed within the same learning environment. The issue with that is that the access to those different services are going to differ by district, and that can be correlated to funding specifically as well.
Exactly.
And you see that with a lot of the data that's been presented as far as teacher turnover, that it's that lack of preparedness, support services, mentorship, that's leading a lot of teachers to leave this profession entirely.
So are LREs, are they formulated or formed by federal government or the state government?
It is the federal.
Combination?
It is the federal standard. So
Okay.
under federal law, the school districts have to provide a least restrictive education environment for students with disabilities. Now, as far as what that looks like for each student, that's going to be specific to each student's IEP, which is created by the IEP team and tailored specifically for that child.
And when I look at inclusive post-secondary education programming, it's dismal, especially for Southwest Georgia. There's only one, except for Columbus State, and that's a ways from my district. There's only one school, it's post-secondary school, that provides that kind of service, and that's the technical college. Is this, how can we improve that? Then you have DBHD. DBHD receives loads of money every year. Then, and we have, there are services that the DBHD should provide to the school systems, the school districts. How do we measure that? Are they really doing what they are supposed to do? And that's the question.
Yeah.
I know we don't have all the
And
right
that-
answers here.
That goes to, let me find the exact slide with this out. Proposing strategies for consideration for state boards of how to properly address the teacher education shortage, but also other factors that we're looking at to measure success here. Improved data collection is one of the biggest contributors of that because, as you said, if you don't have proper data numbers, it can be a moot point as
Difficult,
far as
yeah.
creating informed policies.
Well, there are more, but I'll just.
And I
try to listen to
believe
other-
Rachel is going to be sending out the much more detailed background memo that I put together for the subcommittee. So, Senator, that may answer some of your questions.
One last question,
Yes.
just one, because we really need to talk about this. How do we include our teacher education programs in these discussions? They're not in the room when we talk about it.
Absolutely.
And we have to train teachers.
And I believe we have educators who can speak more to their personal experience with that. But that is specific as far as what the data is showing for technology usage. Not having those educators in the room when those decisions are being made, specifically for technology and special education settings, is one of the biggest pitfalls.
We need to have the teachers there too.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I've got one last question, and thank you, Senator Sims.
Sure.
As I always brag on her, she's forgot more about education than probably most of us will ever know.
It's changed in the last 100 years, okay?
On the dealing at the collegiate level with the colleges that are having the inclusive classes, is that something they're doing on their, like an individual like college basis, or is that?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe
So
it's,
it's just kinda-
each college independently that's putting those programs together, and they differ slightly. And this is a national movement. There's a link in the background memo where you can see all of the colleges nationwide that have programs such as this, but my understanding is those are happening specific to the college programs on the individual level.
Well, I'll brag on mine then, because that's.
Yeah, would love. Yeah, that's something that needs to be further discussed. That could be
Absolutely,
an
yeah.
issue. Dealing with children aging out, and as far as another place for them to go,
being
right,
Mm.
and then
Get a job.
continue on to the workforce from there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Chelsea Hutchings. Going to be, I believe she knows more about inclusive classrooms than probably anyone in the state, at least that I've met so far. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and then before you get started, I wanted to say that Chairman Hickman is watching us online, so he is tuned in. He had some things that he had going on in his district and couldn't make it here to Atlanta today, but he is watching and taking notes, he told me. But I want to say grateful for him for allowing us, and the Lieutenant Governor and his office for allowing us to have this subcommittee.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to have this subcommittee, and so I'm happy to be here for it. My name is Chelsea Hutchings. I remember as a child hearing my parents talking about what was important to them when they bought their house to raise me and my 6 younger siblings in. The public schools in the area was a main deciding factor. They saw the value and opportunity in public education, and they purchased a more expensive home in exchange for a highly reputable public school district. I attended school in that district from kindergarten until I graduated with an Honors Regents diploma. I then went on to achieve a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. When it came time for my husband and I to be able to buy our own first home, we also calculated school district zoning into this big financial decision. In addition, we looked into what the community was like. Is it where we wanted to raise our 3 at the time, soon to be 5 young children? It wasn't until after our 5th baby was born that we learned he might have Down syndrome. Testing verified that he did indeed have Down syndrome, and a few weeks later, we learned that he was in a state of failure to thrive and would require an open heart surgery at 4 months old to repair 2 holes in his heart. While Theo was getting strong enough in the NICU to come home with us, I began my immersion into the Down syndrome community. I had a folder of papers thrown at me along with a common theme: early intervention. Throughout the first couple of years of his life, we did all the things to make sure we were setting him up for his best success. We promised ourselves we would always do all we could to provide him tools, remove obstacles, and never let him be limited by anything or anyone around him. And as successful as we were at the time, we knew the biggest obstacle was quickly approaching: the school system. This year marks the 50th anniversary of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. 50 years ago, public schools were not made to include students with disabilities at all. Many children were denied schooling altogether or were placed in institutions. Parents and grassroots disability advocates were the driving force in this landmark legislation, which guaranteed students with disabilities the right to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. IDEA changed the educational landscape. It opened the doors and said every child deserves an education. But opening the doors was only the first step. Nearly 50 years later, our public education system is still struggling. We are working inside a structure that was designed for a different time. We still have a general education system over here and a special education system over here. Siloed, separate, and too often unequal. Too many students with disabilities are met with low expectations. Too many teachers are not given the training or tools to teach all learners in their classrooms. And too many families are told that separate spaces are the only option. These problems aren't just unfortunate, they are the very barriers IDEA was meant to dismantle. And the truth is, every single one of these challenges has an answer. The model of inclusive education addresses them all. Inclusive education breaks down silos, raises expectations, equips teachers to support diverse learners, and ensures that every student grows up learning and living alongside their peers. It is not just the next step, it is the fulfillment of the promise of IDEA. As we were busy establishing regular check-ins with numerous specialists for Theo's medical needs, finding therapists for weekly speech, occupational, and physical therapies, and jumping through the hoops required just to access the assistance already set aside for people with disabilities, we were also learning about Theo's rights within the school system. But we didn't really come head-to-head with what those rights meant until it was time to transition him from pre-K to kindergarten. Our school district held the reputation of being the best in the state for special education. At first, that felt reassuring, but I quickly began to question what that reputation really meant. Because when we looked at the research, the best practices for educating a child with Down syndrome, the evidence was clear. Children do best when they are learning side by side with their peers, supported by accommodations and specially designed instruction from a trained teacher. And yet, that is not what our district wanted to provide for Theo. Instead of following the research, instead of preparing him for life in the real world alongside all kinds of learners, the system pushed us toward segregation. That's when I realized something. Even in a district with a glowing reputation, families like ours are forced to become experts in special education law and advocacy just to get the very thing that research and federal law already say our children deserve. I was able to convince the educational team at the time that Theo deserved to be given a chance to be placed in a general education classroom at his home school for kindergarten. Our family was so excited. We had 4 of our kids in that elementary school in grades 5, 3, 1, and kindergarten. We knew so many of the teachers and staff and felt the support of the community we had been growing closer to for the previous 8 years. But I knew that Theo's placement was contrary to how the district's special education system functioned. And as the semester wore on, I learned more, and I felt Theo being pushed out. Although the law specifically states that special education is not a place, I was being consistently informed how Theo and his program were a burden, and it was not where the school or district wanted him to be. Even so, Theo was happy, and he was progressing and mastering goals. We had our annual review in December of that year, and I was hopeful that we could finish the school year before talking about any changes. However, the educational side of the team disregarded every piece of law, research, and reports from the experts who work with Theo. They came in with a consensus across the educational side of the team, and they refused to collaborate. Against our will, Theo was removed from his homeschool halfway through the year and put into a different elementary school in a different cluster, in a different city, and into a segregated classroom. Did you know that there's not one quantitative research study since research began on the topic that shows an academic advantage for students with intellectual disabilities in separate settings? In fact, there are many disadvantages found in the research. Students in segregated special education classes and programs spend less time on academic instruction than they do in general education. Students in segregated special education classes and programs receive more support from paraprofessionals than from highly qualified special educators. Students in segregated special education classes and programs experience higher levels of distractions and increased instances of restraint and seclusion. Students in segregated special education settings are less likely to attend post-secondary educational experiences, gain employment, or live independently. On the contrary, including students with disabilities in the general education setting yields benefits for all children. In January of this year, the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, and the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education provided a joint statement on the topic of inclusive educational practices. Along with their January 16th Dear Colleague letter, they compiled a 54-page guide on inclusive practices, full of definitions, research, suggestions, and technical support. This is a summary of the bulleted list they provided on inclusive educational practices. Inclusive education means creating accessible, flexible classrooms where all students can learn and belong, supported by evidence-based teaching, individualized accommodations, and whole school approaches like universal design for learning, multi-tiered systems of supports, and positive behavior and intervention systems. It requires strong family partnerships, well-prepared educators, and systemic supports to ensure every student, including those with disabilities, can thrive academically, socially, and emotionally. I've heard an inclusion advocate say, inclusive teaching is just good teaching. That's one of the benefits of inclusive education. Every teacher gains the training and support to teach all kinds of learners. In a single classroom, you may have gifted students, students with disabilities, students without disabilities, and students who are struggling but may never be formally identified as having extra needs. When teachers are equipped with inclusive practices, they don't wait for a label to respond to a child's needs. They use strategies like differentiated instruction, universal design for learning, and evidence-based interventions to meet each student where they are and help them succeed. And that's the technical why of inclusive education. The same practices that support a child with disabilities also raises the quality of teaching and learning for everyone. It's not about lowering standards, it's about raising capacity. Inclusion is not just a special education reform, it's an education reform that benefits all students. I have researched, attended conferences, initiated phone calls and emails with experts, and met with people from inclusive education technical support centers. This kind of hands-on work has allowed me to not only learn that inclusive education is possible, but to have an actual illustration of what it looks like. And it is beautiful. And the outcomes are what public education is all about. The outcomes for students with disabilities are as follows. Academic outcomes: higher achievement in reading, math, and other core subjects, and greater access to grade level curriculum and higher order thinking. Social emotional outcomes: stronger peer relationships, increased sense of belonging, improved self-confidence and self-determination. Behavioral outcomes: fewer behavioral challenges, improved social problem solving and conflict resolution skills. Post-school outcomes: greater likelihood of post-secondary education, higher rates of employment and independent living, and stronger community engagement and life satisfaction. The outcomes for students without disabilities are as follows: academic outcomes, exposure to diverse perspectives and learning styles, improved collaboration, problem solving, and critical thinking skills. Social emotional outcomes, increased empathy, patience, and respect for differences, stronger communication and leadership skills, and positive attitudes toward diversity. Behavioral and community outcomes, better cooperation, flexibility, and conflict resolution, greater sense of belonging, and reduced bullying or social exclusion. And post-school outcomes, better preparation for diverse workplaces and communities, increased ability to collaborate with people of all abilities, and higher satisfaction with work and community participation. Inclusive education is more than just putting all students together in one room. It is creating a community of belonging and ensuring each student is present, invited, welcome, known, accepted, involved, supported, heard, befriended, and needed. After a year and a half working to get Theo back at his home school, he returned there this fall. Everything that once reminded me of his exclusion is now a reminder of why inclusion is so important for him. Things which families with things which families without kids with disabilities will never think to appreciate, and things I will never take for granted. While he was displaced, we crossed paths with one of his classmates throughout the entire 1.5 years. In the past 6 weeks of this school year, we have crossed paths with his classmates at karate, soccer games, the playground, the homecoming parade, and various places around our city. While he was displaced, I also felt displaced and had a hard time integrating myself into another elementary school while still showing up for our home elementary school and middle school. Now, all school events happen at the same place, and I know parents of Theo's classmates because they have other children who know Theo's siblings. His gen ed teacher taught 2 of my other kids, and most of the staff already know our whole family. While Theo was displaced, he was being taught to be segregated to learn, and he had a hard time paying attention in his gen ed classroom, feeling a part of it. He was a guest in that class, and he sat alone every day at recess next to his teacher for an entire year. And that is so not Theo. Now, he is back to his old self. He follows the gen ed classroom routine as a meaningful member of the class, and he is always surrounded by a dozen peers to play with at recess. When parents fought for IDEA, they imagined a world where every child could learn and belong. Yet decades later, families still shoulder the burden of navigating a system that often separates children instead of including them. Inclusive education changes that story. Through inclusive education, students with disabilities thrive academically, socially, and emotionally, and are being prepared for post-secondary education, meaningful work, and a fulfilling life. Students without disabilities gain empathy, collaboration, leadership skills, and are learning to succeed in a diverse world. Inclusion doesn't just fulfill the promise of IDEA, it transforms our schools into communities where every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential, and every student learns the value of living, learning, and working together. Carolyn Tieglin was assistant superintendent at Cecil County Public Schools. She led her district's transformation from a highly segregated model for educating learners with disabilities to an inclusive model where all children are educated in their neighborhood schools and general education settings. She is now the CEO of MCIE, an inclusive education technical support organization. When confronted with apprehension about transitioning to an inclusive model, Carolyn would tell educators and families, quote, "If not now, when? When is it that you are going to include your child as part of society? If you keep them in a secluded setting until they are 21, what happens afterward?" End quote. I believe we, as the state, have a responsibility to do better for our kids in public education because we know better now and because they deserve the best. What gives me hope is that the path toward inclusive education has already been paved by decades of research, advocacy, and vision. All that's left is for us to choose to walk it together so that every child can reach their full potential.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I've met Theo several times. He's got a magnetic personality, brings a smile to your face as soon as you see him. Glad he's back in his home school, residency school. Is that a fully inclusive environment that he's in now, or?
So he is a member of the Gen Ed classroom first, and then he receives a few pull-out services. So he has his backpack, his name tag, everything is all in one place, and then he goes out just as if a student needed like extra, like reading intervention or math intervention for a period of time, he'll go out for that and then come back in again.
And when you were originally, when he was forced to go to another school, that was not an option. That was when you had no option in keeping him at the residency school. You had to.
They wouldn't let us. We had a plan that was similar to how it is now, but the way that the school district functions is they kind of compartmentalize their resources, and so students who had needs like Theo has, they would want to put him in a program where those are already being shared with other students who have needs like Theo has, rather than fully individualizing his program, which is kind of contrary to the I in IEP, which is individual education program. So I mean, that's what we were dealing with, was trying to get him what he deserved as an individual when they wanted to bunch him into their program that was more efficient for the district.
Are you aware of school systems or schools like within the state that are fully inclusive?
No, I'm not. I've met people who have had successful inclusive experiences for their child, but as a system, I haven't seen any systems actually changed towards that in our state.
Okay.
Only private schools that are actually doing it, sadly, in the entire state, sorry, that I know of, that are actually doing it.
If you would come up and state your name. Thank you.
My name is Patricia Sagne. I'm also a parent advocate. My son, who is autistic, he actually goes to an all-inclusive private school out in Augusta, Georgia, called Immaculate Conception Special Needs School, but it is a fully inclusive.
Would you move the mic down?
Oh, sorry.
We'd just like to make sure we get everything on the record. Thank you.
Sorry. So he goes to Immaculate Conception Special Needs School, but it is a fully inclusive school, so it doesn't matter if you have an actual special needs or not. They actually include you as much as possible. So he may be in a class of 10 students in the school, in his grade, but you wouldn't know him from another student if they each have a disability or not. They treat them all just as the same as each other. They have the best time with each other because the whole school is one environment, and they include everybody from somebody with autism level 3 that is nonverbal to a Down syndrome adult who is about to be 22, about to age out into the education system itself, and even pre-K level 3 students there. And they are one of, I think, 2 fully inclusive private schools that are doing the same model program there that is known throughout the entire state. There is no actual inclusive, fully inclusive, actual school systems here in the state of Georgia, unfortunately. And I've looked because we were trying to find that for my own son myself, because my husband was like, I am willing to move to find it, and we could not find it.
Yeah, I'd love to get the information. I'd love to visit that school.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, Senator Sims.
Let me ask you a question. You were talking about this as a fully inclusive private school. That's
Yeah, a private
located
school, yeah.
in Augusta. What is the class size numbers? What are the numbers in that class?
So for my son, who is a middle school student, they had 10 students
10
in that
students.
class.
Okay, that's
And
good.
they have an actual teacher in that class, and they even will have either a separate teacher or a they call it a paraprofessional. So it really depends on which class it actually is, but he also is a middle schooler, so he does 3 different subjects, so it is actually designed like a middle school, so he is going from science class to English class, math class, social studies class, so he's traveling around like a normal middle school kid. For the English kids, English level grade, they are 10 to 1 typically. Sometimes if they need extra services for them, they will have extra teachers in there for those students themselves. It depends on what their needs are individually, but you wouldn't know if you went inside that classroom what their needs are, because every student is kind of treated just the same as everybody else. The teachers kind of slide in and slide out to give those services to those students themselves, and it worked brilliantly. And this is a school that they even do STEM education. They're doing PE, art, math, music theory. They're doing counseling services. They're even like their adult education program that they have there, they're going out to the community and actually teaching them about jobs and teaching them adulting skills as well, so that they're actually encouraging them independent life skills too. So it's something, and I'm not speaking it just because it's my son's school and I love him to death. It is really, truly a rare school and a rare find that we found just by a stroke of luck, that a parent was like, hey, go check out this school. I think you'll love it. And we were like, we went there and Jackson was like, can I stay now? And I was like, we're home. And things, so.
The next
great.
question from the Department of Ed is, what is the normal class size in our public schools?
For general ed,
Yeah. 30, 28, 20, 29?
it ranges.
Yeah, it depends on the grades and stuff. It goes
Yeah.
anywhere from.
So that's a huge difference there.
yeah.
Of students to having to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, absolutely. What number are you on? 5.
Follow up.
Sorry.
So just because I want to make sure I'm clear on this.
Yeah.
So general population, I guess is how you're describing it, classroom. And help me understand, because when I came in on the last presentation, we were talking about certification of special ed teachers and the need to make sure that we have qualified and prepared teachers.
Yes.
So in both of you, in your general education classroom, are you saying that the special ed teachers aren't necessarily in the classroom all day long, but they're moving in and out, or taking your child out when they need to, or coming in to do something with your child in the classroom? Help me understand, because right now we do make a real big distinction, right? You've got your teachers in your general population classrooms, you got your special ed teachers. How do they work together?
And that's why IEPs are supposed to work so beautifully. So when they develop those individualized education plans, that is how, ideally, when we sit down as a team with the parents, with these educators and stuff, they determine how often are we really need, as a general ed teacher, how often do we need the assistance of a special education teacher? And so from the data itself, it states, okay, we need, like, sometimes, for an example, for my son who has autism, he needs specialized services for when he has math. For once a week, he needs a specialized person that can go in with him just to go over the math lesson for that week and stuff, just to kind of give him that little extra help. Yeah. And the data shows that for him based off of math tests and stuff. And so instead of necessarily pulling him out of class and stuff, which could be a disruption for some of the students and stuff. Also, it could be a labeling factors in middle school. The teachers themselves kind of sneaks in, and they kind of formulate a little small group type of thing with just the other group of kids too, and that special ed teacher is right in there and stuff, kind of going over that lesson too. We'll have another student and stuff kind of going with them. Sometimes what he's struggling with, another student might be struggling with as well, and it kind of formulates this really cool partnership and stuff, and you would never have known, hey, it was that child in itself and stuff, and then it performed this cool kind of ecosystem almost in the school that says, this is what they need, this is what the student, and then the students themselves are learning empathy and stuff, saying, hey, you know, I'm struggling at this too, without actually putting a label on it saying that that child is it has some other things, even though if you ask my son, he'll be like, I'm autistic and that's my superpower, but some other students might not be not be there yet, and that's okay. But to have that inclusive model allows for them to still be able to be included in that, and also it shows them, even at high school levels, even in the state of Washington, seeing those inclusive models in high school level, it actually allows for them to even have a Down syndrome student in student government, that they voted them in, and that person has a voice in what is going on in their school, and it makes them feel empowered and stuff. And it was the students themselves that actually uplifted them to do this, and to have that person feel like they can do that. I mean,
every parent wants that.
yeah, sorry.
Can I hear your story? Because
Yeah.
that's an example in a private school, which is great, and then your son is in a public school.
Correct.
So what's that integration look like now that he's back in his home school?
So right now for Theo, he's in a gen ed class with a co-teacher. So there's a gen ed teacher and then there's a special ed teacher, and they collaborate together on the lessons to work out how he'll be able to access their curriculum. They're there in case if he needs any sort of support or any reminders to stay on task, you know. Yeah. And then he has some pullouts for reading and math, to where he is pulled out into a small group outside of the gen ed classroom for those two subjects.
What was the, I'm sorry.
No,
No,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Senator Sims.
Are you done?
Yes, go ahead. You're probably going to ask the same question that I
What
have.
was the rationale for removing Theo initially? What was the rationale? I mean,
It's hard to say, because I've listened to that meeting over and over to try to understand what the rationale was, because it didn't follow data. The data showed he was progressing, and all decisions are supposed to be data-driven. You don't move a child until you see in the data that they are struggling, and that you have data that you've tried all the accommodations and supplemental aids and services possible in the gen ed classroom, and we didn't have any data on that. We were told they felt he would do better in a different program. So that was the rationale.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So back in his home school where he started and now is back, the pairing, so two teachers, one is the gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher. Is in your son's classroom, are there other kids who would be defined as special needs or special education children in that classroom? I'm just trying to get a
Yes.
sense for
There's at least one other student.
Yeah.
There is within the law a limit to how many students with IEPs you can have in one gen ed classroom with just the one other teacher there, which is like, I think in elementary school, it's like half the class about. So if you have like 25 kids,
Yeah.
then you can have like 12 that have IEPs, which is crazy. Because even in that ideal situation of a teacher and a co-teacher, that's not setting anyone up for success. So one of the components of inclusive education is ensuring that within the school, within the entire school, there's proportionality. So if your school has 10% of their kids with an IEP, you make sure that each classroom has 10% of kids with an IEP. And then you're setting up the teachers for better success, the students for better success, the whole class.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, and and I appreciate you inviting me to that meeting. What was that, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Time starts running together. But, we met with your school system and, talked to them about, a fully inclusive classroom and the challenges that they brought up, which surprised me a little bit, but it was that they would actually need to hire more general ed teachers because they would have to add classrooms because of if they put all of the students with special needs back into general ed, doing it inclusively, that they would have to add classrooms because the classroom size would grow too much. But then the more I thought about it, well, then you're losing those special ed classrooms. So, I mean, I don't know. That'd be something, maybe a follow-up meeting with them I'd love to ask.
Yeah.
I think it would be kind of a net trade-off, I would think. But
Yeah.
'cause you're not increasing the number of students within the school. But
Yeah.
that was just something that kind of stood out to me. In his description of true inclusiveness versus if it's not, you've got basically a separation within the classroom, kids with special needs, kids with general ed, that you don't have that, and I agree with that part, but I wasn't sure, I didn't fully grasp, him, because I know it was then he kept bringing up also, teacher shortage, finding teachers, but I just see that being a net trade-off. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Well, what I think is hard, you're right. I feel the same way, and the research and the schools that have done it have shown that it's actually not more expensive to move toward this inclusive system. It's actually less expensive. The difficulty is in the transition period, right? Because we're
You
not
hit the
talking.
nail on the head with that. That's
The transition is where it's messy.
Yeah.
Because we have to transform the whole system. We're not just putting kids in the gen ed classroom. We're training all teachers to know how to teach all learners. And then we're doing that sort of a shuffle where we're going to be putting them in their classes more proportionally and then getting rid of some of those separate classrooms. And it's just a really big, messy transition is what it is, to do it the right way and to have it last. So.
That's been the roadblock. I've seen the time I've spent in education is, it's tough to change things, once they're set a certain way.
Yeah.
And then too, he brought up, the culture with the teachers and
Right.
the fear of losing some of the teachers and all. I mean, but it goes back to, having to make that adjustment, and it is painful when you do make changes initially, even if you're making it for the better.
Yeah.
One question on the Chairman Hickman, he's chairman of our education committee. He asked a question as far as like what the tuition was at that school.
It depends on the level of services for them. They have a tiered thing. They start off roughly around $5,000, and then it goes up to about $19,000. For those who need that kind of exclusion, we do have what's called a STAR program, which is those students who unfortunately, even when they tried that inclusion classroom and stuff, we still, there are still a very, very small percentage of students that just, even after trying inclusion classrooms and stuff, they just still need that kind of specialized, they need that kind of only classroom and stuff, which is what we call a STAR classroom. But we only have one of those classrooms, and even then, those students itself, which is something that is even very important in inclusion schools, just because we have that one classroom where that's all they do, they are still involved in like our general assemblies. They still do all the other stuff, because the one other thing that I do know, even though I do go, my son goes to private schools, because I am a special needs advocate myself, is the inclusion classroom leads to these students not being able to be involved in the general assemblies. So, like, let's just say there's a play going on. These are the students that are most likely not going to be able to be a part to see those plays. PE classes are usually something that doesn't happen with these students also. So, and these are the students that most likely are the ones that would actually benefit from those classes more than any of these other students too, because they need to be out. They need to be able to express themselves through art and music and sing. So it's just that kind of stuff. So we always, our principal, Ms. Palfy, made sure even those special, I think it's 6 students that are in that one specialized classroom, every time when we had an assembly and stuff, those students, they have their spot, they have their place and stuff in our schools. And that was the one thing she was like, when we were going to do this, we are going to do this all the way. So,
Yeah, I really would like to visit that school
Yeah,
if we could set that up at
absolutely.
some point.
Uh-huh.
And you reminded me, I've got my middle daughter's in 10th grade, and they've got a
my
student with
oldest
Down
just
syndrome.
graduated high school, so I already know about
But
those
they
types of
allow
stuff,
him
so-
to, on Fridays, he gets to get up and announce that the pep rally, and he fires all the kids up, tells them where the game is, tells them what time it is, and she said he's not reading off of any script, and he can speak better than most of the students
Yeah.
in the room, is what she tells me. So, yeah, that's exciting. Thank you all for your testimony.
very
Any further questions?
Just one last.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator Sims.
And here again, we are talking about the data. And the growth of the population in the state of Georgia over the last decade. We're talking about an additional 1 million plus people that have moved into the state. And when those people come, they bring children, okay? And most of those children will go into public education arenas. Now, if you look at a classroom setting of 28 plus students versus a classroom of 10, and let's say about a third of those children have IEPs. We don't have the data on that, do we? You,
Yeah,
somebody
20
does.
29%.
You have, how, is about 29%
Is that right? That's what I
per
remember.
classroom.
No, not per classroom, but I
Okay,
think,
okay, just statewide.
yeah,
And I would-
15%, okay.
Nationally, it's about 14 to 15%.
Yeah, 14 to 15% at this point.
That's nationally. I would rather see a narrow statistic than that, because every state's different. So how do we, and we have to look at what the school is saying. We have to look at what the teacher, the classroom teacher, is being asked to do. And I understand your plight, I truly do. But knowing everything that goes on, and the amount of mandates that we place on teachers annually, to try to keep up with that, along with those students, because they are mandated to make sure that those IEPs are met. And if they aren't, they are in trouble. Am I right, Mr. Department of Education person? So I think we have to be very, not cautious, but we have to have the teachers in the decision-making realm of this, because right now, yes, I'm a parent. I know what I want for my child. And if that district is not able to get it for me, then, you do find other places for them, whether it's affordable or not, because you're going to do everything that you can to make sure that your child is educated. But we really have to consider how much, the amount of money that we're putting into education, which is the biggest part of our budget, and how those dollars are being used. The other is DBHD, the amount of money we place there, and how they are connecting with our school districts, because I ask my schools about the DBHD and what kind of connections do they have.
And Senator, I did want to bring that up, which is something that I have some link with the Georgia Rehabilitation Vocational Agency themselves. one of the things that Chris Powell, who is the lead on that agency, he has been trying to work with all of the different various high schools throughout all of the state of Georgia, as far as trying to work with them during that transition age, which is age 14 now, and to work on a transition plan so that they are ready to go by the time that they reach either when they are actually graduating from high school or when they are ultimately aging out, depending on what that looks like for them. My daughter is actually one of those recipients of that program, because she actually is utilizing the Bud McCall Scholarship within that program. And what they actually do, which is an incredible program within themselves, they have a few facilities that actually does some on-the-job trainings, which some of it is construction work for those developmental disabilities individuals. They even have a whole program teaching blind individuals how to actually raise their own income as well. And they even do rehabilitation stuff locally for individuals who need that too, and will actually go in to, let's just say someone wants to go and work for like at the ice cream shop or something like that.
Right.
They will actually go in with them to a local ice cream shop that will be willing to work with them and develop kind of like an actual plan in place, like a POS system. Maybe that's the one thing that is stopping them from actually being able to work with them, because they just don't have the intellectual capacity to develop a POS system that they can actually utilize for them. And they've actually gone in and done that already once before. And that individual was able to use that POS system, has a sustainable job at an ice cream shop, scoop the best ice cream in the world and stuff out in our town, and is able to collect his own paycheck, and is now learning what to do with that paycheck afterwards and stuff, thanks to GVRA. So there are programs out there. It's just he's having to work with the high schools and trying to reach out to each of those high schools to formulate that plan so that they can actually get that started.
Yeah. Well, there's a disconnect sometimes between the departments that we have in the state, throughout the state, and the high schools, or just the educational community. So something we need to work on.
Yeah, it is definitely there.
And I just want to add too, if we're teaching our kids to be separate, K to 12, and then we have to go through this transition period to get them ready for whatever they want to embark on next, a lot of cases we're having to teach them how to be reintegrated into society. And so one of the things that you avoid if you keep kids in as much as possible is some of that extra work you have to do in transition. And I just wanted to add to your concern, Senator, about the IEPs being followed. Unfortunately, right now, all IEPs aren't being followed. And with the teachers, needing to be trained, I mean, we see the teachers aren't happy now. They're not staying. So I think that when I see those challenges come up, and they're extremely valid concerns that many people hold, I just see it more of a shift. It's just a shift from where are we putting our money now, where are we putting our training now, where are we putting our focus now on our kids, and then just shifting it into a way where we know the outcomes are going to be better for everybody. Teacher satisfaction increases when they have better training and support. We're optimistic sometimes.
Oh, that's okay. You're a parent. You're a mother.
And I brought a folder because I try to not go anywhere empty-handed, so I brought a folder with some information for you all. Would you like me to pass it out now?
Sure, that'd be great. And thank you both for your testimony today. Yeah, this is our first meeting. I'll definitely be visiting the private school that was mentioned, and then also would like to visit some of our public schools that are doing the partial inclusion, where they're only removing students part of the time, and I'll make sure the committee's invited if y'all are available on this issue, but definitely want to dive deep into it and then the other issues we've got here set forth. But That is all we have for our agenda today, and we're adjourned, and thank everyone in the audience for attending. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.